Good evening. Tonight we gather after a journey through the light in the dark, a Lenten journey as we discovered both the kingdom of God that is here and among us and the kingdom of God with which we long for. We talked about how we live in a space where the joys and grace of Christ mix and mingle with the darkness and the pains and the anguish of life. We've been spending this time recognizing that in life sometimes it feels like the darkness overwhelms us as the light and the grace gets further and further away. We recognize that in Jesus' life, he experienced all of those things. The joys of God's presence, the joys of his followers understanding and embracing and accepting, and the pain of having to stand against, the frustration of having to constantly teach, the unimaginable of dear friends betraying you. It's Holy Week. And I often joke, we oftentimes go from the triumphal entry to the resurrection and we forget what happens in between. The triumphal entry where Jesus proclaimed something that the people did not want to hear. Where Jesus proclaimed a way of being and of doing that went against the expectations of the people. A radical understanding of how to live God's kingdom that did not match the expectations. A radical understanding of love. And then we move into the temple, and Jesus cleansing the temple, and we have Jesus who all of a sudden does act like what we expect people in power to act like. He does get mad, and he gets angry, and he rages in this space. But we learn that behind this anger is his longing for all people, not just the privileged few, but all people, especially those from the margins, to be allowed to participate in worshiping the Creator. We move on to Passover and the Lord's Supper, and then we find Jesus in the garden. Is he in the garden again looking for approval from God? Is he in the garden looking for a way out of what is to come? Or was he in the garden preparing himself for what was upon him? The betrayal. And then trials in front of the religious, trials in front of Rome, and trials in front of Herod, who kind of bridged the two. The church attacking Jesus, the state attacking Jesus, those that try to bridge that gap between the two attacking Jesus because his message was so radical, his ideas of love and grace. He's beaten. And then, as is the custom, 4 Roman soldiers lead Jesus through the streets in the longest route possible to the place where he would be crucified. A journey where he would drag his cross, where people would gather and laugh at him and mock him and throw things at him. The very people who sang his praises. Jesus comes to the cross. He's nailed to the cross. That cross is raised up and put into place, and that is where we are tonight. Here to listen to and reflect on the last 7 things Jesus had to say to each of us.
Two others also, who were criminals, were led away to be put to death with him. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing."
Forgive them. Forgive them. These men, these brutes, who had spent the day beating him, ridiculing him, mocking him. The religious folks, so proud of their righteousness, who were conniving and practiced all forms of trickery in the name of God, believing all that they had done was right and good. A world that really didn't care, a world that had never heard of nor cared to know about this Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus says, "Forgive them. Forgive them." I wonder what the men who were killing him heard. I wonder what the men who were torturing Jesus heard in those words, "Forgive them." No, I'm sorry. No recognition of doing wrong. It was their job to torture. Sometimes when people say, "I forgive you," and you're like, "Well, I have nothing to be forgiven about." Did they get angry? Were they confused? I doubt any of their lives were changed when Jesus said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." What do you hear? What do you think when Jesus says, "Forgive them"? When Jesus says, "I forgive you"?
And the guards cast lots to divide his clothing, and the people stood by watching. But the leaders scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself. If he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine, and saying, "If you are the King of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanged there kept deriding him and saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." He replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise."
Paradise, it's a Persian word. It refers to the king's walled-in garden. And a Persian king would honor a servant who had done well, or whom he liked or even loved. He would honor the servant by inviting him into this walled garden, inviting him into paradise, and sitting with him and talking with him and feasting with him. A great honor to be a servant who's invited into paradise for all you had done for the love of the master. Well, why was this man honored? He didn't earn this. He hadn't done anything well. In fact, the church very quickly after the story tried to whitewash this one. They tried to make this man like a Robin Hood who was robbing from the rich to give to the poor. They tried to make this man somebody that he wasn't. You had to be the worst of the worst to be crucified. You had to be recognized as so lost, so worthless, so horrible, so evil, that not only would you be put to death, but you would be put to death in the most horrific way. And you'd be put to death in a way that everyone who looked at you would be given a lesson. This man did not deserve this. This man lived a life that was disgusting and despicable. He didn't ask for forgiveness It wasn't like at that last moment before he died, he said, "Oh, forgive me for what I've done." No, he didn't do that. He was an awful man who Jesus gave honor. An awful man who Jesus gave honor. What is Jesus trying to teach us in these last 7 things from the cross? There are some individuals in our world who I would like to see crucified. There are individuals in our world who I think deserve to be crucified. And yet these most despicable people in our world, people that I despise, that I look at and only see evil, and yet Jesus gives them honor and invites them to come and dwell with him in paradise. In the dark places where we sometimes go, where the light gets crushed by the darkness in our own hearts, and as we look upon a person in that space, and we see Jesus inviting that person to a place of honor, can you handle the truth of Good Friday?
Standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." I don't think we recognize how brave these people are. I don't think we realize the danger that they were truly in. I don't think we can imagine the love. Everyone else had run. Remember Peter? "I will be with you always." Thomas, who once said, "Let's go and die with him if we must." And yet in the end, his mother, his aunt, his cousin John,
and Mary Magdalene. His mother, an incredibly special woman, trusted with Jesus, raised him, taught him, loved him, cared for him, nurtured him. If they were all ridiculing Jesus, could you imagine what they were saying to the woman who gave birth to such a creature? How often do we blame the parents for the despicable lives of their children? And yet, Mary came. I'm sure she was the only mother that was there that day. Jesus' aunt, a woman that he had actually reprimanded in public, and yet she came in love and in grace. Mary Magdalene, so transformed, her life so transformed, she would have given up that life to be there in that moment. I've actually been jealous of the relationship of a mother and their daughter or their son. It's a relationship I will never have as a father. I think it's a relationship I'm not meant to have. After all the care and the love and the nurture that Mary gave, and then the encouragement at this time to not feel all alone, to once again look in the eyes of this woman who you looked for in the crowds, who you looked for when you fell and skinned your knee, who you looked for when your heart was broken. This person, this woman, this mama, who was there and through the pain and the anguish that only a mother could feel to watch her child go through such hell on earth, is there to give him the will to go on. And what does Jesus do? One of the last things he does, one of the last things he says to us is he turns the tables and he cares for her. In this time of anguish and pain, he stops, not because he's the eldest son, not because it was the expectations, but because out of who Jesus is, who he was, what he wanted to say to us in this final time. He was worried about those who loved him to the end. And then I wonder, as Jesus was cared for and blessed by Mary, and he looked to care for her, as we are cared for and loved by Jesus, how do we care for him? He told us. He made clear to us. When you do this to the least of these, you do it for me. A reminder from the cross. I wonder who is in our lives, in our church, in our community, who we need to care for, who we need to see Jesus' face.
When Jesus knew that all was now finished, he said, in order to fulfill the scripture, "I am thirsty." A jar full of sour wine was standing there, so they put a sponge full of the wine on a branch of hyssop and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the wine, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit.
The humanity. There's been a theme this Lenten season. It's that humanity did not know what to expect. In fact, Jesus did not meet the expectations of humanity. And in those words, "I thirst," in the moment, something so small, in the moment, a longing for something. The humanity that came from Jesus in this little thing, in the midst of all that was horrible in that moment, he gets a tiny blessing from a simple thing. The people in Jesus' day found that Jesus was not what they expected. In our day and age, we have made Jesus into what we want. Not sure who Jesus is in all of that. I wonder if the answer might be in our own humanity. If the answer might be in the little things. So when was the last time you found pleasure in the depths of darkness in those little things? When was the last time you truly experienced your humanity?
When it was noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?"
my God, why have you forsaken me? Many times have I read those lines and wondered. I remember when I was little being taught how part of the sacrifice of Christ was the abandonment of God. And then I became a parent, and I knew there was no way that God abandoned his child. I realized that no matter how dark and horrific it was, no matter how alone Jesus felt, God was present in that space. God was there. God was doing all that God could do. Well, actually, he didn't. He did nothing for his love for you and me. The words that Jesus shared on the cross were not just random words. They were words that came to him from the scriptures of old. They were the words that we find in Psalm 22. Here are some of these words. For although only a few trickled from his lips, all these words were screaming from his heart. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me, from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer. And by night, but find no rest. Many bulls encircle me, strong bulls of Bashan surround me. They open wide their mouths at me like a ravening and roaring lion. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted within my breast. My mouth is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. You, God, lay me in the dust of death. For dogs are all around me. A company of evildoers encircle me. My hands and feet have shriveled. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among themselves, and for my clothing they cast lots. I have raised these words. I found myself out of the light of grace, or at least not recognizing it in my life, and overwhelmed by the darkness of the world. And these are the words that came from my lips. But they did not come from my lips as they came from Jesus, as Jesus was remembering and experiencing. They came from my lips as I stood on the threshold of blasphemy and called out my Creator. But Jesus knew, and so we know. Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? What's the answer? The Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. What does he do? He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the darkest valleys, I fear no evil. For you are with me. for you, God, are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. And surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. And I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So in our darkest days, when we cry out to our God, hear the words in your heart of heart, the words that Jesus clung to.
While the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two, then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. There are times like this that I am reminded of the artistry and the writing that took place in the Gospels. For in these words, we are given a drama. A theology is played out for when Jesus cries out, into your hands I commend my spirit. The darkness overwhelms in a bright sunny day. And the temple's curtain rips, that fabric that for hundreds of years separated creation from the Creator. A curtain representing our inability to ever be at all good enough to even think about being in the presence of our Creator. The symbolism of in this moment that is no more. In this moment, through the grace of Jesus Christ, we can now not only worship, but be intimate with our Creator in the way that was intended from the dawn of time. But that's not the part of the story that Jesus was telling us in these words. Into your hands I commend my spirit are the first words of Psalm 31. Not the first words, they are the words of Psalm 31:5. These words, into your hands I commend my spirit, every good Jewish mother taught to their children from the youngest of age. And every evening
from that child's lips as they would go to bed and prepare to fall asleep, they would say to their Creator, "Into your hands I commend my spirit." Jesus lifts up his childhood prayer. Of all things, in that moment, it were the words of a child given to him from his mother that he raises up. And I wonder, what words do you need to hear tonight? What words do you need to remember?
Jesus said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit.
It is finished. In the Greek, it was one word. One word that was actually a cry of victory. It is finished. Jesus from the cross proclaiming to all who could listen, victory is at hand. He might have mumbled his childhood prayer, but he screamed these words of victory. Now, we have no idea what came first. Did he mutter the prayer of a child, or did he proclaim victory? But I don't think it really matters. Because what kind of victory is this? I mean, everything that Jesus said and stood for went against the world. Everything that Jesus said and stood for went against the church. Everything that Jesus said and stood for. He died the worst death, saved for the most despicable, evil, disgusting people, and yet he claimed victory. And this night, I ask myself, how far am I from living into his world? How far am I from living in his gifts? How far am I from living in his victory?
Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last.
Go in peace.